Hello, welcome to Tech Talk. This is episode 2, the Cat's Pajamas. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is Tech Talk. That's TEC, Technology Education by Connect Us. We're your hosts, Ryan Bowman and Bryan East, and this is our second episode, so this is the last time we're going to introduce ourselves and talk about who we are. After that, you're just going to have to go back and watch episode 1 or 2, because that's what we're deciding, right? So I'm Ryan Bowman, 20 plus years in the wireless industry. The last 16 have been with Verizon Wireless, came to the Connect Us team at the beginning of this year, 2023, and we're a strategic partner with the wireless carriers for hardware, solutions, services, and a boatload of know-how, right? So just all kinds of cool stuff from that perspective. So most of my career has been in technical sales, solutions architect, solutions engineer, and those types of roles. So that's a little bit about me. I just recently bought a one wheel, if you know what those are. If you don't, go look them up. And I'm not injured, and I've had it for a week or two. So, but I will say, while riding it, anything over 10 miles an hour, I pretty much believe I'm going to die. So that's who I am right now. So, Bryan, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Awesome. I'm Bryan East. I've got a couple decades in networking and cyber forensics and cybersecurity. I am the wireless WAN architect for Connect Us. Prior to Connect Us, I worked in the public safety division of Motorola, doing in-car video systems and body-worn camera systems. I recently had my mind read by a mentalist at the Cradle Point convention here this last week, and it blew my mind. People were like, "Were you part of the show?" I would have thought I was part of the show, but no. I mean, seriously, this guy, I have no idea what he did. I still don't know. I mean, I'm like a hardcore skeptic about this stuff. Figure out his game. I have no clue.
Well, that's pretty cool.
Pretty awesome.
Yeah. Awesome.
Let's talk tech.
What's that?
Let's talk tech now.
Let's talk tech. Yeah. So the idea behind our Tech Talk podcast, all right, is that we're going to bring you subjects and just different items that are important in IT and very important in the wireless world, right? The cellular wireless world that maybe you know a little bit about, maybe you'd like to know more about. And so what we're going to try to do every week is just add a little more value and flavor and kind of dive into some of the more details regarding some of these different subjects. So we're going to kick today off. The reason we call it Cat's Pajamas is because we're going to talk LTE categories. And based on that, we'll get started. And so, and by the way, the Cat's Pajamas was not my own term. Thank you, Jack Black, School of Rock. Well, I think it was older than that, but that's where I'm coming from.
Did you know that he was on a kid's show one time called Yo Gabba Gabba?
I did not. I know that show, but I did not know.
Yeah, like and they would bring on guests, you know, that adults would know, and they would get like a 2-minute blurb here. But when Jack Black was on there, he was so good. Like the entire show was him. He was like on the whole show. He wasn't just like a little 5-second guest appearance. He's awesome.
Very cool. Well, let's talk a little bit more about categories, and we're going to gabba gabba about them, right? So up on the screen, we have a list of at least the first 15 LTE categories. And so we just want to dive a little bit further into this because there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of misunderstanding out there in the industry, and so we kind of want to talk through what this means. Obviously, the short term for category is CAT. Typically in IT, we hear this a lot when we're talking cabling, right? Cat 5, Cat 5e, Cat 6. Those are all cats too. They have nothing to do with these cats. These cats are way different than those cats, so they're all wearing pajamas, but we got different cats. All right, so the other item I want to point out is release 13 at the top there for NB1 and M1. We're going to come back to them, but yeah, it does look a little backwards that you see release 13, release 12, and then you see release 8 through 12. So we're going to focus on release 8 and 10, and then we'll talk a little bit about kind of the future releases and what that means. So real quick, just so you understand, it says 3GPP release. 3GPP is an organization, they're a body of engineers, I believe, and they don't build laws or rules regarding cellular, but their releases are they explain some of the capabilities that happen with the LTE radios that get put in routers and phones and tablets and all that kind of
stuff. Think of ITIL.
There you go. Yeah.
IEEE. Better would be IEEE.
Yeah, that's a perfect example, right? So they're not a governing body, but they really get together and they form this understanding of what the new releases of technology are in the LTE world. We're speaking LTE specifically right now, and then we'll go there. MIMO, M-I-M-O, you might see that term up there, is multiple in, multiple out. That's why if you start seeing 4G sometimes has 2 antennas, sometimes you'll see 4 antennas on routers. That's multiple in, multiple out as far as how the antenna array is going on with the technology. And then, of course, megabytes for max download and max upload, right? So when we focus on release 8, and these are a little older, these releases, right? Because you have to remember, back in 2011 is when LTE really started hitting the gates. And so 2 of the more popular router categories that we'll talk about that are being sold today are Cat 4 and Cat 6. So we really wanted to put this podcast together to talk specifically about the differences there. And so as you can see, Cat 4 has a max download of 150 and has a max upload of 50. It also has a max number of MIMO layers, right? That multiple in, multiple out. All of those factors, the MIMO and some of these other factors we're going to talk about today, can limit how fast and how the device actually performs, right? So from that stage, that's kind of where we're at with Cat 4 and Category 4 LTE. But what you have to understand is, while that's the max theoretical speed, that doesn't necessarily mean that as long as the customer needs something under 150, we're just going to sell them a Category 4, right? So think of this, for instance. A Ferrari can hit a max speed of 150, but so can a Learjet, right? But they both can hit 150 a little bit differently, right? So it depends on what we're trying to do with them, right? That airplane, that jet, can get to 150 a lot faster than Ferrari. You might have thought when I was starting with Ferrari, I was going to go to like Fiat next or something. I don't know, Kia. But yeah, the Ferrari that you thought was going to be the fast thing in this example is actually the slower item in this example, right? So just because it can get to 150 doesn't mean it's the right tool for the job all the time. We use Cat 4 a lot for more simplistic home users, maybe somebody on the go. They might use something like that, similar to a Wi-Fi or a MiFi device, right? And so as we go up the chain in LTE categories, you can see the speeds are driven up as well, right? So the higher the category, traditionally, the higher it performs. It's got a higher ceiling for speed. And the other item is there's some additional factors that come in as the releases. Because with every release, it's not just the download speeds and upload speeds, but you can start seeing the MIMO layers increase in some of them. There are just additional factors that allow a wireless carrier to leverage more of their technology to allow those routers faster. We're talking routers because that's what we talk. So,
and if I can interject, one thing is, if you look at the difference between, say, Cat 12 and Cat 13, right? Cat 13 has a lower download rate than Cat 12, but it has a higher upload rate. This is good for examples where you're not downloading as much, but you might be uploading more. For example, in law enforcement vehicles, right? They download some, they're interacting with their CAD and RMS systems back at home base, but a lot of the throughput is uploading video to the cloud or to a cloud source like Azure or AWS. So that's an example where a lower download speed but a higher upload speed would be useful. And there's plenty of other instances.
That's a great example, though. Yeah, especially like when you started saying that, I was thinking, I mean, anyone who's doing any type of streaming or camera, they're typically uploading that to a cloud or a broadcast or whatever they're doing for live. So totally makes sense. And so that kind of gives you a good base of the LTE categories. And also, as you go up in those numbers, you'll also notice in the real world, the cost of the devices typically go up because the cost of that radio goes up because it's more capable, just like anything else, right? Going back to the release 13 and 12, I was having this conversation with Brian a week or so ago. We were talking about how as the internet and LTE and 5G and all these technologies started to mature, they realized what value wireless can play in the Internet of Things and machine-to-machine connectivity. And those, all of that is basic, very small data being used. Think of monitoring a refrigerator. Think of monitoring a generator, right? Just little different items that super small kilobytes of data, doesn't need to be fast, most of the time, doesn't even need to be super time sensitive. In a lot of cases, it's just out there just monitoring, doing its thing. So that's where you see that NB stands for narrowband, and then M1 is category M. And both of those are even smaller than the Cat 1 LTE, right? So those, that and the Cat 0, all three of them were released a little bit later, and that's really where they're targeting. They're targeting a lot of low data solutions that get put out in the field and stay out in the field for a little while. And in some cases, they can't even upload. In some cases, they have to have a request given to them in order for them to do anything, right? They're kind of sensors out there that could just be sleeping until somebody wakes them up using an app or a portal or something. So
a perfect example of this is, so I was in Austin yesterday, and I decided to grab one of those scooters, right, where you have the QR code and use the thing. Well,
yeah.
Each one of those, it was explaining, each one of those has a Cat M1 router on it. Kind of a funny story, because all they're doing is sending a tiny bit of data. It's a funny story. A new friend of mine, Aaron, was telling me that they had a scenario where they were shipping a bunch of these guys in a truck, in a big truck. There's hundreds of them in this truck, and the supplier actually turned them on. And they were all turned on, and so like as they were hitting cell tower to cell tower, barreling down the road, they could see each tower just crash until they called the customer and said, "Turn off your bikes now."
Nice.
Kind of funny, but Cat M1 actually helps with that scenario in that it takes off just a very small amount of spots. So even if you have dozens or hundreds of those things going on simultaneously, it less likely to crash a tower.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that's a great example too. Not so funny for the network folks who the towers were crashing, but kind of funny to hear now, right?
Yeah.
That's awesome. All right, so let's get talking about one other subject that we kind of felt was part of this conversation as well, because it really differentiates the performance that you'll get out of a Cat 6 router versus a Cat 4. And the reason it does that is because Release 10, which we can see on the screen, Release 10 brings us something we call Carrier Aggregation. That's not aggregating the wireless carriers and we're all just, there's one big wireless carrier in the United States and that's it. They all aggregated together. That's not what this means. When we're talking carrier in this term, the term carrier is actually talking about the communication that carries your data back and forth across a wireless network. So all of the wireless carriers can use carrier aggregation. I know I just said carriers a whole lot, but let's talk a little bit about it. So we start with the tower because, well, you need one of those if we're going to talk about cellular communication. And so if you can think of your phone, your router, your tablet, whatever it happens to be communicating with the network, think of the data being driven back and forth, your communication between the tower and your device, as a dump truck, right? So you go to google.com and search for cheese, whatever, right? Cheese is really good. I like cheese. And it sends that data to the cellular network that goes out on the internet and then brings your data back and says, boom, and that's how you get an image of a bunch of blocks of, usually it's Swiss cheese. I search cheese pretty often. Swiss cheese is like the traditional picture of cheese. So anyhow, so you get that, and that's that dump truck going back and forth. And so that's kind of what it looks like from a router as well, right? So phone, router, whatever happens to be, the router is obviously a little bit more amplified from that standpoint because you can have multiple people connected to a router doing that versus the phone. So in release 10, I think it was release 10. Yeah, is that what I mentioned? So
Yeah.
in the release where category 6 is involved, carrier aggregation really changes the game. So what has happened is with carrier aggregation, they've now been able to add additional layers into that communication going back and forth. So they can multiply that. So instead of one dump truck taking all your data, you can have 2 dump trucks taking all your data. And in fact, you can have 3 dump trucks taking all your data. So with that release, it allowed a wireless carrier to add this solution into their mix to allow a user that 3 times the amount of data can be communicating back and forth between the end user and the network. That's a huge deal. So sometimes when you look at, again, when we talk about, in the earlier screen, we talked about the categories, not necessarily about the theoretical high speed, but you get performance because now you're moving 3 times the amount of data in the same amount of time. And so whenever you do that, obviously, you have a huge performance difference. Hopefully that rings true, right?
Dump trucks are awesome.
So dump trucks are awesome. Other items that can impact our speeds are certainly of the equipment as well. We've seen certainly with customers and ourselves where a newer piece of equipment can help with your bandwidth speeds. We've seen that the equipment and technology inside a device can also help, right? So this is why we talk about higher end devices versus maybe value devices. Some of them have better components that really do allow faster communication. So anything else you want to add to that, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, keep in mind also the quality of your devices. You're also going to have a whole lot of environmental factors involved. EMI, the placement of the device, all of these things play into what's your end result getting stuff to the firewall. The antennas, sometimes you need external antennas. We'll have a whole session on that.
Yeah, we got a lot of topics to cover as we continue moving through these. By all means, send us an email, hit us up on LinkedIn, contact us and let us know if there's any questions you have or even subjects. What's that?
Smoke signals, that's fine too.
Yep, smoke signals, carrier pigeons, you name it, we'll take it. So thank you for joining our TEC talk. We're going to transition to a couple things for the end. I'll call this segment "Sorry Not Sorry," sponsored not sponsored. But I'm a child of the '90s, and so I have to tell you, every spring, Target starts selling these Lifesaver Swirls lollipops. I don't know if you were in the '90s. They bring me back to math class of the '90s when I was memorizing the first 7 or 8 numbers of pi. But they give swirl. I know. I'm like, what's going on here? This is a tech podcast. Why are we talking about lollipops? I'm just saying they're amazing. The blue raspberries are really amazing, and Target sells them. So you should probably go out and get some lollipops because, quite frankly, we're just older kids in this life. So that's what I've got. I'm not even talking any real tech here.
Yeah, and that's really not appropriate for our tech talk. We should be talking about Big League Chew.
Ah, there we go. That's a good
Which,
one.
in my opinion, is a far superior slice of childhood.
Yeah, I like it. I remember there used to be like beef jerky, shredded beef jerky that looked like it was in like a tobacco container or something.
Yes.
I don't know what it was. The '90s were a little messed up from some parts. I guess everyone would
not slide today. No one would get away with it.
So, anyways, we're gonna move on from this.
All right, and a piece of tech that I really, really enjoy, actually one of my favorite routers in the game, is the Cradlepoint R1900. This is a mobile device. It's in-car use. It's at 20. You didn't see that on our list. it's got about 4 gig speed of download speed. It's pretty darn fast. Now you'll notice that there are here, these are SMA ports here for your cables. You got 4 cellular ones. You got a Bluetooth, DIV. You've got also 2.4 and 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi antenna ports as well. This thing does not come by default. It doesn't come with the antennas, so you're going to want to put them in there. Usually, the Cradlepoint will bring send you with a lot of like paddle antennas for a lot of their devices. But this thing is probably never going to use a paddle antenna. It goes inside of a trunk. It's heavily ruggedized. So, if you think about law enforcement, police vehicles, you got guys throwing duffel bags. You've got guys throwing breaching equipment, riot gear in there. It can handle like the temperatures high, it's IP67, dust and water rated. So it's a solid device. It's got dual SIMs, 4 Ethernet ports. One of them is pre-designated as WAN, and the other 3 are LAN. But as with all Cradlepoint stuff, you can change multiple. You can change a LAN to a WAN and vice versa. And it's got a bunch of GPIO ports for a lot of sensors in there. Opening up the the rear car on the rear gate on a K9 car. That can trigger a sensor. Ignition can trigger a sensor. All sorts of stuff. R1900, pretty awesome.
Yeah, definitely awesome.
That's all I got.
Sure, but all right. Our next episode, we're going to be talking about SIM bonding, bandwidth bonding, LTE bonding, load balancing, all of the different things you can do with multiple SIM cards. Because there's a lot you can do with mobile SIM cards. There's some technologies out there that are really cool, and there's a ton of confusion of what you can do with it. So, so join us for that next week. Follow us on LinkedIn and any of our social media accounts. Collectively doing some really positive and awesome things for the community and giving back to impact our communities. So there's more to come there, and you'll see that. But that's all I've got today, Brian. I'm not quite sure if you have any closing words of wisdom.
Up, up, down, down, left, right, BA star.
Nice. There you go. Let's play some Contra.
Yes.
And on that note,
hard if you're going to play 2-player.
Yes. Yep. Very good point. You should always play 2-player. You should always have a friend. That way you're not lonely.
Red and blue, red and blue.
There you go. Enjoy, everyone. Have an amazing day.